Okay, I got a pretty simple yet very eye-opening video for you guys today, and it's about retiring because the whole point of investing and picking the best ETFs and stocks is so that way one day we can transition to living off of these investments. That's kind of the whole point of all this, so it makes sense to talk about what that process actually looks like. I personally invest in both growth and dividend assets, and in M1 Finance, we can see the total return from both of those, but they also split it up between market gain and earned dividends, which is super useful in my opinion. So, personally, when I go to retire, I'm going to be living off of the earned dividends. But for people that do not do dividend investing, the most popular way to transition to investing is what's known as the 4% rule. There's tons of great videos on this topic, so I'm not going to go into depth on what it is, but I will give you some background. So, the 4% rule, with this, you withdraw 4% of your investment account balance in the first year of retirement. And then each year after that, you increase the amount to keep pace with inflation. And that's pretty much it. That's why it's very popular. And statistically, over like 20 years, it has a very high success rate. So that means you're not going to run out of money. So the plan for this video is to simply see which method is better, dividends or the 4% rule. So this is a percent withdrawal calculator. So this is going to replicate the 4% rule. And then I have another one over here. And this one is a dividend calculator. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the same starting numbers in. So the only difference is that one's a dividend and one's a withdrawal. So number of years in retirement. So this is how long the simulation is going to run. So I just put 20 years. The goal is to retire as early as possible. It's kind of the FIRE movement. So you want this to last you a long time, ideally more than 20 years. But 20 is good for now. For how many years until you retire, I'm putting in 0. So simulating that we're about to retire. The nest egg is 300,000 bucks. Inflation, I put in 3%. Historically, inflation is more like 2%, but right now there's kind of some question marks about that. For the annual price appreciation, I'm going to put in 10%. I'm assuming you're investing in just the S&P 500 for this method, which most people probably are. And I believe over the past 10 years, the average return for the S&P 500 is like 12.5%. Although if I come to my brokerage and I type in SPY, over the past 5 years, it went up 122%. So if you divide that by 5, it's like 24% per year. So I think 10% is pretty conservative. And then this is the 4% rule. So we're going to be withdrawing 4% annually, and it's going to be adjusted for inflation, that 3% that we put in. Now coming over to the dividend calculator, once again, I'm keeping this very identical. So the principal is 300,000 bucks. The annual dividend yield is 4%. That's a super realistic number. If anything, that's very conservative. But as mentioned, the 4% rule is just mimicking a 4% dividend yield, so this is going to make it as close as possible. The annual contribution is 0 because we want to live off of these dividends. The expected annual dividend increase is 7%. So as mentioned, the previous calculator is going to be based off of the S&P 500, and this one is going to be based off of SCHD. And the dividend growth rate for SCHD is actually way more than 7%. We can see here that in the last year it was 17%, but the lowest I've seen here is 7%. So that's the number I'm going to use, being conservative once again. The distribution frequency is on a quarterly basis. The qualified dividend tax rate is 15%. I'm putting in that same 10% per year in share price appreciation. We are not going to be reinvesting the dividend because we want to live off of the dividends. And the tax-exempt dividend income allowed per year is 40,000 bucks per individual. In my last video, I said it was 80,000, but that's for married couples filing jointly. But for individuals, it's $40,000 limit. And I'm going to put that same 20-year runtime in the simulation. And these are the results. On the left side, we have the 4% calculator, and on the right side, we have the dividends. Now, before I jump into this, quick disclaimer, this is a simple simulation. It has assumptions, it does the same thing for 20 years in a row, and of course, real life isn't quite like that. The whole point of this is to show the difference between a fixed withdrawal, adjusted for inflation, versus a growing dividend over time. And the difference is quite stark. So let's begin with the 4% withdrawal rule. As mentioned, you begin with a balance of $300,000. You withdraw 4% or $12,000. And then the market goes up 10% that year, so you gain $28,800. And the reason why this is not an even 30,000 bucks is because you withdrew 12,000 bucks to live off of. So you're not gaining 10% on the full 300,000. And that leaves you with a balance of $316,000, roughly speaking. And then the simulation just repeats, so you begin with the end balance of the previous year, and it does the same thing over and over again. Now let's come over to the dividend calculator, and luckily it's laid out in a very similar way, so it's easy to compare and see the differences. So the initial principal is the same $300,000. It has a 4% dividend yield, so you get roughly a $12,000 payout. And here the principal increase is the full $30,000 because you didn't sell any shares. You just simply got a dividend payout. So that leaves you with an ending balance of $330,000 and you received 12,000 bucks in dividend payments. And then of course, just like the other simulation, it repeats. So the next beginning balance is that 330,000 bucks and so on and so on. I want to draw your attention to the yield and the yield on cost because that is the only real difference between these two calculators, and it's the main difference functionality between a withdraw and having dividend growth companies. So we can just see the immense power of a 7% growth in a dividend over a long period of time. You gotta remember, you're looking at 20 years. So in the beginning, it goes from 4% to 4.28% to 4.5%. So nothing to tell your mother about. But if we skip down 15 years in time, you now have a dividend yield of over 10% and a yield on cost of 48%. And because of this growing yield over time, the end balance and the payouts are quite different between these two methods. So let's begin with the 4% rule. At the end of this 20-year period, you're going to have an annual withdrawal of $33,790 per year. And the end account balance is going to be $892,000. So you definitely didn't run out of money, and this is a great way to go. It's just that when you compare it versus the power of dividend growth, it just pales in comparison. So here, the final annual dividend payout was $280,000, and that is thanks to the growing dividend yield over time, leaving you with a dividend yield after 20 years of 14.5%. And the yield on cost, not to mention, is 110%. Allow me to throw a definition at you guys. So yield on cost is just a measure of a dividend yield calculated by dividing a stock's current dividend by the price initially paid for that stock. So an example is if an investor purchased a stock 5 years ago for 20 bucks and its current dividend is $1.50 per share, then the yield on cost for that stock is 7.5%. And if I come back to the dividend calculator, we never made additional annual contributions. We just lived off of this nest egg. And that's one of the reasons why the yield on cost is so impressive. And to finish off the data, you're going to have an end balance of just over $2 million with this method. And the main reason why this is more than the 4% rule is because the 4% rule, you are selling shares and equity. And with dividend investing, you never sell shares, and that allows you to have more compounded growth over the years. Now, a final thing I really like about the dividend path is that the performance of your dividends is independent of what the stock price is doing, in a way that, of course, the 4% rule isn't. The 4% rule is very dependent on what the stock price is doing, and the company has no control over the stock price. That just depends on what other humans are valuing the company at. But they do have complete control over their dividend policy. So let me give you a quick little example here. So Merck & Co., this is a blue chip dividend paying company, and in the past year, it's actually gone down in value 7%. And this value chart is simply how other humans value this company. It doesn't reflect the underlying actual fundamentals of the company itself. The financials do. So if we look at the total revenue of this company, we can see it's steadily going up year over year, and the trailing 12 months, they've made the most revenue that they've ever made in the history of this company. So fundamentally, the company is doing pretty well, even though the value that other people are giving this company is declining. But as a dividend investor, especially if you're relying on this for income in retirement, it doesn't really matter. The company is doing well, they're paying out a 3.5% dividend yield, and they're increasing it roughly 7% every single year, and it's supported by their strong fundamentals. They're making more money. So there's a direct correlation there. If the underlying asset is doing well, then they can afford to pay out an increasing dividend, and it doesn't matter what other people are valuing the stock. Now we can look at Tesla. This is an example of a growth company, and it's one of my favorite growth companies. So I'm not trying to pick on them or anything like that. But ever since February of 2021, the stock has declined a little bit and moved sideways. Even though the financials are actually amazing, they continue to make more and more money, they have more intrinsic value, but they don't pay a dividend currently. So that means you're fully reliant on what other people are pricing this company at. So if you're doing the 4% rule, selling shares of this company while it's not doing much, that is not the best situation to be in. So that's pretty much it. I just want to talk about the end game and how we are going to transition to retiring and what different strategies kind of look like and what results do they give. And clearly, I'm a fan of dividends for that aspect of my life. But if you're still watching and enjoyed, give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, all that YouTube stuff, and I'll see you in the next one.